Hey guys, Jay here, welcome to EonsOfBattle, and today I want to share with you my experience painting during a pandemic. I want to share what I've learned and show off the weirdest collection of minis you've ever seen. I've been painting like a fiend for about 6 months, and not a day goes by I don't put brush to model, and that means I've painted a lot of minis. I have improved tremendously, and it is in large part due to me painting the most random stuff. For years and years, I painted nothing but my armies for 40k, and that made me really good at painting my armies. But as I've branched out into the wild world of random minis, I've found so many more techniques, used different colors, and my painting abilities have soared. So sit back, relax, and paint some minis as I go through all the models I've painted, what I learned, what worked, what didn't work, and just sharing the experience. First up, Nuka Girl. This model is a Fallout Wastelands Warfare Nuka Girl by Modifius Games. This is the first model I think I painted that I had no intention of playing it in a game. I just saw this scrolling on Amazon, and I am a huge fan of the Fallout world, and so I had to have it. Even though I've never played Fallout 4, which is where I believe this mini comes from, I have over 300 hours in Fallout New Vegas. It's one of my all-time favorite things. It's also one of Oprah's favorite things. This is one of the first models I tried really hard on. I gave it a Zenithal Prime, and I glazed most of the colors on. And I think it turned out really well. Originally I painted the base some very clean colors, but I think going back and making it look really weathered is actually added a lot to the model. And I also like that the Nuka Girl standing on top is kind of perfect on top of the horrible ruined world of the base. Also, this model was tiny, and so because it's so tiny, it painted up really fast. And because it painted up so fast, overall I just had a wonderful painting experience painting this model. And this model also was the one that opened the door for me to paint lots of weird stuff. Painting this model is kind of what awakened my desire to paint lots of weird and random models I find online. Before, I would save up all of my hobby dollars for buying 40k kits, but now I think I actually buy more weird random stuff than I actually do for 40k. But I love this model. At the time, it was the best model I had ever painted, and I'm really lucky to have it in my collection. Next is this Plague Doctor. This model is a Reaper model called Dungeon Dweller's Sister Hazel. It's a Plague Doctor. And I love this model. I painted this one right after the Nuka Girl, and I also feel that this is one of the best models I've ever painted. Again, I found this model on Amazon. It's nice and heavy because it's made out of metal, and I decided even though all the reference material I found online had this in dark browns and blacks, I wanted to use some bright colors, and I think it really helped out the model. For some reason, this model makes me think of 2020, but I can't imagine why. I think even though I used lots and lots of fun colors, they're all kind of in the same tone. So I don't think it feels super disjointed. And I had a ton of fun freehanding a whole bunch of tiny little skulls on these plague bombs. It took way longer than it should have to paint these skulls, considering how tiny they are, but I really think they turned out nice. And another really fun detail I added was some glowing green goo pouring out of one of the bombs. I think the Reaper miniatures line are getting a little old, but I think some of them like this still have tons of character and hold up. And she's standing on a wooden base that I sculpted out of green stuff. Overall, I love this model, and it'll always remind me of the year 2020. Next, 5 Orc Bikers. These models are 5 Orc War Bikers from the game Warhammer 40,000. Now these are sold in packs of 3, but I painted 5 because I own about 20 of these guys, and I've been dreading painting them up. They're just big enough to take way longer than an infantry, but they're just small enough that you don't get the satisfaction of a finished vehicle. They kind of exist in a weird middle ground where it is an infantry model that comes off the board in 1 or 2 wounds, but it does take a good chunk of time to paint. I really do love these models though. I go all out on my orcs. A lot of the times people kind of let themselves get a little bit mushy and be less detailed on orcs because it kind of makes sense in the lore. Orcs are dirty and smelly and they don't build things right. And so it kind of makes sense for things not to be pristine. But I decided that I wanted all of my orcs to be very clean and painterly. Because of that, it takes me an incredibly long time to paint my orcs, but I think it's worth it. My orc army is very small, but I still love it dearly, and I think it has some of my best painting in it. On every single one of these Orc War Bikers, I kit bash and converted them to make them a little bit unique. And to paint these models, I actually primed them all with some Vallejo liquid silver. Now this is a really bright paint, and so I didn't have to do any highlighting or shading. All I did was I used washes and pigment powders to add in lots and lots of details and grime onto the bikes. The orcs themselves, all 5 of them, have a unique recipe for the skin. On all my orcs, I take all my different greens and my green washes, and I mix them up so that no 2 orcs have exactly the same skin color. I absolutely love these guys, even though they took an incredibly long time to paint, and I can't wait to not paint the 15 more of them for a few more years. I think in the future, I'm going to paint these orcs in batches of 2. I think 5 was just a little bit too much. It a little bit ruined the painting experience, because by the end of it, I just wanted them finished. Also, one fun thing I tried with these orcs is I glued them down to the base with some 5-minute epoxy, and it seems to hold really well. Next is Tau Resting Sniper. This model is a Greater Good Resting Sniper by Wargames exclusive. This is probably their most popular model in their entire range, and it's not a Tau, it's a Greater Good alien. This model is absolutely tiny. The base it comes on is a 25mm, and the entire model would probably fit nicely on a penny. Even though it's so incredibly small, I actually painted it in sections. The body was one piece, the hair was a separate piece, and the gun was another piece. Overall, this model was really fun to paint. I painted it in one session, and actually, the base and the gun and her armor all started out the same color, but I used weathering powders to bring down the color of the base. Overall, I'm really happy with this model. I don't know if Greater Good aliens have glowing white eyes, which is how I painted it, but I think it looks good on the model. And I think I did a really good job with the blue skin. At this point in time, I wasn't very adept at painting skin in general, and so it was really a challenge to paint blue skin. But I just watched clips of Blue Man Group online, and that gave me a lot of good reference. Overall, I think this model is really fun. I have no idea what drew me to it, but I'm glad I have it in my collection. Next, 5 Necron Immortals. These models are 5 Necron Immortals with Tesla carbines from Games Workshop for the game Warhammer 40,000. I collected my Necrons when I was in high school, and I've kind of put them away for the last 5 years. So coming back, I wanted something that was the same scheme that I did pick when I was in high school, but that I could paint much better now. Before, my colors were white bodies with black guns with blue highlights, and the problem with blue is it kind of just looks like the white. And I made another mistake by having them on snow bases, so it was a light-colored model with light-colored accents on a light-colored base. Overall, it was not much to look at, and I'd love to go back and fix them all up. And so these are my test models to see if I could do a better job with them now. Instead of light blue, I used reds and oranges for the accent color, and I think it looks really, really cool. And wherever possible, I think I'm going to try to apply some decals because I think they add a lot to the model. The tricky thing with Necrons is they just kind of have bodies. They're almost like skeletons, and so it's hard to make them unique, so I think I'm going to try to find every different way that I can make each model an individual. Also, when I painted these the first time, I primed them white, and then I gave them a wash of Nuln Oil to darken them, and I didn't realize how dark they got. And so I actually used some white paint, and I brought up all the colors back up to near white, and I think it looks really, really striking. These guys got me really jazzed to get back into my Necrons, and sometime soon you might see me paint more of them. But who knows? Next, an Orc Boy. This model is an Orc Boy from Games Workshop for the game Warhammer 40,000. This is a model I painted up on camera, and I'm really proud of how it turned out. We have an old video on how to paint orcs, and we have a video on how to paint orc faces, but this video takes you through how to paint this entire guy. One thing I really tried on this model was to make sure that I highlighted really nicely on all of the muscles and the raised areas on the skin, because orcs tend to get really dark really fast, and so I brought up all the colors as much as I could. And on things like his pants and his weapons, I used a combination of Black Templar Technical Paint, which is a black kind of inky wash that Games Workshop sells, mixed with a black wash, so that I had black pooled in the recesses, but I still had the nice shiny metal on top. I find this works really nicely for grungy metal, and it's really easy to do. Overall, I think that this is kind of the best use for contrast paints, because they do tend to look a little splotchy when you put them on, but it's perfect for things like bandages or pants where you don't really care, you just want to get it done. And it still gives a good result. But this is the only Orc Boy I painted in 2020, and I think I have 20 more on sprue, so I'm gonna have to get a move on. Next, a Deathwatch Space Marine. This model is a Deathwatch kill team member for Warhammer 40,000 by Games Workshop. I have a weird relationship with the Deathwatch. I collected a whole bunch of them when they first came out, and I painted them all way too dark, so I don't really like what I did with them. I have about 20 of these Deathwatch veterans all painted up, ready to go. I also don't have very good loadouts for them. I think they all have the special issue ammunition bolt gun, and a power weapon, which doesn't really make a lot of sense, but that's what they give you in the kit. This one is made for the optimal loadout for 8th edition of Warhammer 40,000. A chainsword and a storm bolter. This bolter was 3D printed from Shapeways from the maker Pop Goes the Monkey, and I think I have 20 more of these Deathwatch veterans with the storm bolter because the storm bolter was amazing in 8th edition. Unfortunately, we're in 9th edition now, where the storm bolter doesn't get any special issue ammunition, and so it's pretty much not worth taking. So I own 20 Deathwatch veterans that are way too dark and I don't like how I painted them, and then I own 20 more that are painted really nicely with a loadout that doesn't work at all in 9th edition. So overall, I don't think I'm ever going to get this army finished. To paint this guy up, I actually airbrushed the entire model with some Vallejo liquid silver, which is really nice, and then I covered it in contrast paint, which gave me a really quick and easy effect that I think is really good. I have a few more squads of these guys to paint up, but I don't know if I'm going to get to them anytime soon. And every day that goes by, these guys just become a little bit worse than their Primaris counterparts, so overall, maybe this is just an army for eBay. Before we get to the next mini, I want to tell you about our Patreon. If you like the channel and enjoy our content, consider supporting us on Patreon. Over there, you'll get access to exclusive content, help me pick the weird models that I paint live on YouTube, and more. With that out of the way, let's get back to the minis. 3 Necron Warriors. These models are 3 Necron Warriors for Warhammer 40,000 by Games Workshop. These are the new Indominus Necron Warriors, and they've come out separately since then. These 3 models I painted up on camera for videos, and they come in 3 unique schemes, but the first one I think is my favorite. This classic Necron in silver and green scheme really took me back to 2014 when I started my Necron army. I remember I got a box of Immortals, and that was the first thing I had ever painted. Painting the whole model with some lead belcher and then painting the silver highlights is exactly how I did it in high school. And then highlighting the green rod with different layers of green paint moving up all the way to yellow it brought me right back to where I was. Back when I had Cheeto dust on my fingers and I was using a brush that was way too big for what I was doing. I think the new Games Workshop Necron color scheme looks pretty cool with the bronzy gold colors, but I do kind of miss the old 5th edition Necron colors. And I must say, I really hope the other armies in 40k all get the same Indominus treatment, where they get almost a dozen new units, because all the Necron models look gorgeous, and I can't wait to see more of them come out for the other races. I think of the 3, this blue one is probably my least favorite. It's pretty cool, and I like that it actually has kind of some stripes on it. Again, with Necrons, it's hard to add individuality to each model because they're mostly identical, but I think some small stripes like these blue accents help a lot. And I remember to get the paint to flow nicely into the cracks on this gun, I actually watered them down a lot, and then I actually took a damp brush and I wetted the entire gun, and then applied the watered down paint so that it actually flowed into the recesses, and that worked out really nicely. I think my favorite of the 3 is this bone guy. Now, this guy is just painted in the style of an Eldar Death Reaper. It's the exact thing. It's the bone, it's the skull-looking face, the red gun, and then the dark black body. I think this would actually be a really fun scheme to take throughout an entire Necron army. An entire army right on the verge of succumbing to the Destroyer affliction, where Necrons just become hell-bent on extinguishing all life in the galaxy. I think that this would be a really cool scheme. There's something about that skull face with the red eyes that just does it for me. It was fun painting up these Indominus Necrons, and I have a whole bunch to paint for my personal Necron army, so I can't wait to work on them. A Tau Ethereal. This model is a Greater Good Etheria by Wargames exclusive. Once again, this is not a Tau, it's a Greater Good alien. And I think this model has some of the most fun basing I've ever done. Most of it is cork, and then I actually poured some 5-minute epoxy into the middle to hold up my custom flying stand, because this model didn't come with a flying stand. I think the clear acrylic rod I used coming out of the water looks super cool. And overall, I just love this model. I painted it up in one long painting session, and I think the white that I highlighted all the way up to pure white is very striking. Once again, a trend with these Wargames exclusive models, they come in a lot of separate pieces and are kind of finicky to put together. The body was separate, the staff was separate, the weird back spike backpack thing was separate, and the long flowing hair was separate. So I painted them all separately and then super glued them together very carefully. I really like how the colors on this model work together. The blue of the not a Tau skin, the brown of the jumpsuit, the bright white of all the armor, and then the red on the hair and on the base that she's standing on. This is something that all of these Wargames exclusive models have, and a lot of the Games Workshop models are starting to have this too, but the model does kind of tell a story. Especially with my custom basing, I really like how it's just this perfect thing floating over kind of a gross, swampy landscape. And then the swoop of the hair, I think that this is a very, very fun model. And once again, I don't know what jumped out at me about this model, but I had to have it. Retro Space Marine Chaplain. This model is a retro Chaplain. I believe this is 2nd edition for Warhammer 40,000 by Games Workshop. I am a big fan of the Black Templar. I have almost 10,000 points of Space Marine Black Templar's chapter, and I collect the Chaplains, and this guy had to be in my collection. I particularly wanted this model because it comes from that lovely time when Games Workshop loved to put skulls on the crotches of their Space Marine Chaplains. I don't know how they did it, but back in the day, when all of these models were hand sculpted with like popsicle sticks, they managed to get skulls everywhere. I think I counted it for the video and there was something like 30 skulls. I'm not going to count again because it would take too long, but his knees are skulls, his belts are skulls, he has skulls all over his Crozius Arcanum, he has skulls on his face, his face is a skull. It's just wonderful, and I think that the new Primaris Marines are severely lacking in skulls. I think this was one of those models that was a hybrid metal plastic kit, and so I replaced the regular arm, which I believe was meant to be holding a bolt gun or a combat knife, and I put a plasma pistol on. This is the plasma pistol from one of the Betrayal at Calth boxes. So it is the correct period, although it does look a little modern in this guy's hands. This is another model that I was really proud of painting it up on camera. I remember, I don't know how I got my setup, but for some reason, I had a really comfortable time painting this guy up on camera, and I've never quite managed to get back there. I also painted this guy in a very retro style, using the brush for everything. I think the only thing I did the airbrushing was primer. And I'm very proud of the custom freehanding on the banner. This banner is made out of tin. I have a video on how to do this. And I'm really, really happy with how the freehanding turned out. It's still pretty simple. It's got the Templar symbol, a small skull, and a banner that says Templar. And I would actually love to do another banner that's way more ornate now that I have the practice in. But overall, I think there's just some sort of magic in these old school sculpts, and I love having them in my collection. I have a whole bunch more that I'm sure I'll get to paint eventually, and I can't wait to have them all next to each other. Every Chaplain that Games Workshop has ever made. Also, one fun thing I did was one shoulder pad has a black Templar icon, and then the other shoulder pad has a white symbol. It's a little bit of a bummer that he's holding his arms so far up because it's actually kind of hard to see his shoulder pads, but it's just a fun detail that makes me really happy. 5 adorable ninja salamanders. These models are 5 unique ninja salamanders by Cobra Mode, and they were 3D printed for me by a company on Etsy called Draconis Fundamentus. These guys were the first things I painted live on camera, and I still think they're one of the best things I've ever painted in my entire life. I believe that these were the very first thing I ever painted that aren't grim dark or kind of evil in some way, and I really absolutely adore how they came out. I remember looking at lots of reference material for frogs and salamanders, and I finally landed on this creature called an axolotl. It's a really kind of weird, it's kind of like a pig pink. It looks like a pig, but it's an underwater animal, and it's super adorable. And so that was what I used as all the skin on all of these salamanders. I think Cobra Mode did an absolutely wonderful job designing these guys. They're all super dynamic and absolutely adorable. They each have a unique weapon, and I think that they are just, I mean, they're so cute. It looks like they're not, like they're warriors, obviously, but they're just so adorable. I want to see these guys in like an animated short or some kind of a cartoon. This was my first time also working with 3D printed miniatures, and holy cow, are they fragile. I think every single one of them experienced some sort of breakage while I was painting them, and it wasn't like I was going crazy. Like, there was one that I dropped, so sure, that one broke, but I think all of them had just something snap while I was carefully and slowly painting them. So I'm not against painting 3D printed miniatures, but I think I'd always prefer a resin cast if I can get it. I think my favorites of this series is definitely this guy with the fan. He actually also differs because he's not wearing blue clothing. He is wearing a black and red jacket. And I like to think that he is an Akatsuki from Naruto because I watched Naruto when I was 12. And that always stuck with me, is how cool their jackets looked. Another really cool thing about these miniatures is actually all of the bases don't come with these designs. These were all actually provided for me by Draconis Fundamentus. I think that they must have just a whole bunch of random bases and they just 3D print them and then just give them to you with your purchase. And so I ended up with 5 unique bases, but I painted them all using the same palette so that they all kind of felt like they were in the same world. And I think these guys have the perfect, like, cute eyes. It's just black with a white dot. I remember trying on a bunch of different things, like having a white rim and then a big black pupil and then a white dot in the middle, and that made them look a little bit crazy. And I think I reversed it, but just the simple black eye with one tiny white dot is perfect. It makes them look big and watery. And another really fun thing I found while painting these guys was this eel steed thing. I remember looking up some reference material on eels, and there's this eel called the banana eel that looks exactly like a banana. And so the viewers guilted me into painting it that way, and I totally love it. I didn't think it would turn out really nice, but it actually worked out really, really well. And I found the perfect way to highlight yellow is to actually give it base coats of purple and pink, and then you airbrush the yellow on top. Overall, I think these are some of the most fun models I've ever painted, and they're some of my favorite models that I own. Next, a retro Chaplain Space Marine on bike. This model is the old school Warhammer 40,000 Chaplain on bike. This guy is hilarious. The sculpt is absolutely legendary. The body is actually from the Chaplain on jet bike, and the bike is a 2nd edition Space Marine bike version 2. Took me forever to figure that out, but now we know. One thing about painting these rogue trader models is that they definitely lack detail, and so I tried to add it back in by doing lots and lots of freehanding. I painted the Templar cross on the dots of the shoulder pads, and I painted the same design on the wings of the bike. And so I just love it. It reminds me a lot of Judge Dredd, which I believe was a major inspiration for a lot of these old models. I believe Games Workshop even made some Judge Dredd miniatures at the time. On his leg armor, I decided to give him kind of a fake knee pad, and I painted it checkerboarding with black and red, and I loved it so much that I also took that and applied it to the wings. So you will know that this guy is riding his bike. This model also weighs a ton. It's a lot of pewter. And if I ever dropped this, I'm sure I would lose a ton of paint and I would have a giant flat dent on the model. Another fun thing about these old models is you can kind of see where the sculptors have decided that things are good enough. Like this skull gear shift is barely a skull. And in the back on the saddlebags, one of the saddlebags is just a rectangle. They didn't paint any detailing or any straps or anything. It's just a rectangle. At that point, they were like, well, 5 o'clock, time to go home. I love these old Rogue Trader minis, and I believe I have just about every Rogue Trader Chaplain they've ever made, so I can't wait to get them all painted up, and one of these decades I'll have them all in the collection. Also, his windshield looks like a tombstone, and I just think that is hilarious, and I think that they should have that on the new Primaris bikes. 3rd edition Space Marine Chaplain on bike. This model is the 3rd edition Space Marine Chaplain on bike for Warhammer 40,000 by Games Workshop. This model I actually got new in box. It's a hybrid kit. The bike is made out of plastic, but the rider is all metal. It was super fun to unbox and build a old kit. It was super cool. It came with an old catalog, and this banner on the back of the bike came with it. It was a piece of plastic. It was a piece of paper, rather. And I really debated putting on the paper one, but I kind of decided in the end that I wanted it to look good, and so I ended up making my own out of tin and then freehanding the Templar symbols. But I think one day I will go back and use that paper one for something. Maybe something on an area that's a little bit less going to get destroyed by using it in battle. This model has way more detail than the Rogue Trader, but it still is lacking in a few areas, and I felt like I had to kind of bump up the detail. So I did some freehanding on his legs and on the handle of his Crozius Arcanum and the handles of his motorbike. I actually painted pink and purple stripes to add in kind of a fake texture. On his face, I gave him a freshly shorn bald head, and on the tubes that are going directly into his brain, I actually painted red and yellow stripes, and I'm very proud of how they came out. One thing about this model is it's kind of generic because it's meant to slot into any army, and so this is Black Templars. And so I had to add a lot of details to try to help make it look like it could fit in the Black Templars army. And so I actually used etched brass. They used to sell it on Forge World for the Black Templar, and I can see why they don't sell it anymore. It's kind of a pain in the butt to use. It doesn't want to glue down very well. The material is so slick that it tends to just kind of pop off, and so I had to sand it with 60 grit sandpaper to give it enough grit to really kind of want to stay stuck down. And so it's nice and it adds a lot of detail, but I can see why they discontinued it. Also, the radar that's on his handlebars, I think is definitely the best screen I've ever painted. And I've painted a few screens, but this one is definitely the best one. And what's funny is after I painted this one, I've painted a few more and they're not as good. It takes constant vigilance and constant practice. In the video I made showing off all 3 of these chaplains, I think I weighed them all, and this one does weigh significantly less than the all lead model, even though it's about twice as big. And on this bike, I added custom exhaust. I think I used plastic card, but I do have a video on how to do a very similar technique using coffee straws. Overall, this is a wonderful Chaplain addition to my collection, and you'll never guess what model I painted next. Primaris Chaplain on Bike. This model is a Primaris Chaplain on Bike for the game Warhammer 40,000 by Games Workshop. This is another model I painted up on stream, and I'm very, very proud of it. I love how this turned out. I didn't paint a lot of models for my Black Templar this year, but I really should. Another thing I tried out on this model was I took my airbrush and I set the PSI to just above 0 so that the paint didn't necessarily want to flow out and it just kind of spat. And then I watered the paint down a lot. And so I spattered the paint onto the bottom of the bike to make it look like it had kicked up dust and had settled on the model. And I think that this is the way to do it. I've seen a lot of people take the airbrush and they kind of let the paint mist onto a model, and that does kind of look more like dust, but it covers up so much of the detail in the paint that's underneath. Whereas the semi-transparent splattering, I think, does a really good job of conveying the same effect while still giving you a lot of the paint underneath. And I really like how this worked, and I'm probably going to do it to all my Black Templar from now on. This is also a model where I discovered the wonderfulness of the Army Painter shades. They are super great. They go on a little bit thinner than the Games Workshop ones, and so I find that you should put on a few thin coats, and that'll give you some really, really nice control over your shading. Usually with the Games Workshop Nuln Oil or Ergodoth Earthshade, I kind of slather it on and then let it dry. But just putting on a thin coat of Army Painter and then letting it dry in like 30 seconds and then putting on another one lets you really kind of see what you're doing, and you can really get some nice dark lines. I used it a lot for panel lining all of the gray areas of his armor, and I really, really liked how it turned out. Right after this model, I went out and I bought the entire set of Army Painter washes. I really like them. This model is just so cool, and this model is what made me decide I really like Primaris Marines. I was holding out for a long time. When they first dropped, I bought a few, but I kind of painted them up as a separate Black Templar army. But with this model, I just think they're cool now, and they're going right into the Legion. Not every Primaris thing that comes out I love. A lot of their vehicles are kinda poopy, but this model is perfection. Also, if your name is Maxley Fox, you know why on one of the purity seals, the word Max is written. This model is the lovely cherry on top to my Chaplain on Bike collection. Well, that's it for right now. I'm having an absolute blast looking back at these minis. Stay tuned for the gripping conclusion next week, or maybe it's already out. I don't know when you're watching this. Comment below what's your best model of 2020, and consider sharing it with us on Instagram or on our subreddit r/EonsOfBattle. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, thanks for watching.